Jamie from Shamrock Girl World, and today I'm going to show you how I continue to grow cherimoya trees from seeds. This is a continuation of the fall to spring 2020 update where I documented the growth of the cherimoyas from November 2019 to March 2020. In this third update video, we'll see how the cherimoya seedlings grow while they're in the Texas spring weather from March to October 2020 once they go into a winter greenhouse. But before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel and ring the notification bell for more videos about exotic fruits and how to grow them from seeds. You can also follow my Instagram and Facebook pages for more fruit tree updates and the occasional Irish music and dance. On March 29th, 2020, I dismantled the greenhouse that I kept my plants in for the past 5 months. The cherimoyas were ready to go outside in the Texas spring weather. One tree grew the most while in the greenhouse. The others did well too and loved the heat and humidity in the greenhouse. I took a closer look at the 2 sets of cherimoya seedlings. One set was 1 year and 7 months old, and the other set was 1 year old. I gave all of my plants some fertilizer and Epsom salt so they could continue to have green branches and leaves while in the Texas sun. I kept the plants in partial sun while they adjusted to the spring weather. I also plan to transplant them into individual containers, especially the ones that grew the most in the greenhouse. The weather was very mild during the month of April. There was a small cold front recently, and it had been raining off and on throughout the month, even today. The cherimoyas were looking great. The largest one kept growing every time I visited them each week. I recently noticed some rust-colored development on their leaves. It started when I took the plants outside. The plants weren't dying, but it was odd that there was some discoloration. Weeks ago, the leaves also had some mildew. I wanted to keep watching the plants to see any other problems with the rust and mildew. I had some more small cherimoyas. They were old because I had them in a container in water and they were in the hot greenhouse. I didn't know if they would sprout or not, but the heat didn't affect them and they were coming up nicely after about a month from planting. Other than the rusty leaves and mildew, the cherimoyas were doing great in the partial sun. I planned on moving more plants around to get more sun in the yard. Today, I decided to transplant some of my young cherimoya seedlings. This 3-month-old batch was sharing a small pot and they were growing nicely in the partial sun. I was able to get some pots from a store since getting supplies was difficult due to the quarantine restrictions. I couldn't quite put each plant in individual pots, but the plants had more wiggle room in the new containers. I hope that the plants would continue to grow in the Texas spring. Today, I plan to fertilize most of my fruit tree seedlings. Some of the younger cherimoyas were looking great on the table. The largest cherimoyas were looking even better. I was thinking about moving them again, especially the one that had the large leaves. They recently started growing taller in the past few weeks. The tallest one was about 4 feet tall with huge leaves. I'll have to continue to support the plant and bag the container so it can continue to hold water during the hot month. The younger cherimoyas were looking good 1 month after their transplant. The seedlings in the 2 containers were 1 month apart. So one set was about 4 months old, while the other set was about 3 months old. The year-old ones were growing taller and making larger leaves. In the process of transplanting some air-pruned loquats, I decided to reuse the container and transplant my largest cherimoya trees. They've been in their containers for about 5 months, so they could use a little bit more room. I also plan to transplant the largest cherimoya tree into a deeper and larger container. I decided to do an air-pruned container to allow the plants to grow their roots. When the roots grow towards the mesh, they will dry out. The plants will produce more and finer roots to absorb more nutrients. I would have to protect the basket from drafts and heat because the air-pruning containers tend to dry out faster than regular containers. But the process would encourage more root growth. In the end, I put cherimoyas number 2, 3, 5, and 6 in the purple air prune basket. I wanted these plants to grow as much as they could. Cherimoya number 4, with the 3 branches, still had its own container. 3 weeks later, I transplanted the year-old Cherimoya set into more containers. I noticed that one plant grew faster than the others, and I wanted it to expand into its own space. The other plants were smaller and weren't growing as fast. I also got some more pots, so I decided to utilize the new supply to give these seedlings some more room to grow. The weather had been hot in the Texas summer. We've had several over 100-degree days and very few chances of rain. Some plants were struggling in the heat, while others were flourishing in it. At times, we had to water the plants daily and bag the containers to hold in the water. The transplanted cherimoyas were doing good in their new container. They were still leaning over, but they've put on new growth on the tops. I still kept them in partial sun because of the natural drying risk of the basket, but they were looking good after a few weeks. The younger plants continued to grow taller after their transplants. One of the year-old plants was growing tall on the table. I kept them in partial sun to keep them safe from the heat and sun. I moved Cherimoya number 1 and 4 into a full sun location next to our chicken pen. They sat next to an Esperanza bush and were shaded by it at some points during the day. I also bagged the containers to hold in water during the hot days. The 2 plants seemed to love the full sun. Cherimoya number 1 kept growing taller with large leaves. Number 4 continued to grow new leaves on 2 of its branches. By August 1st, it had been raining for the past 2 weeks, including today, partially due to a tropical storm in South Texas. The plants have been enjoying the rain and the brief relief from the heat. 2 weeks ago, I fertilized all my plants with a new citrus fertilizer. Today, I noticed that many of my plants have grown a lot since then. Cherimoyas number 1 and 4 were still enjoying the partial sun. By this time, the Esperanza plant was growing taller than the Cherimoyas, providing them with more shade throughout the day. The Cherimoya skyrocketed in the past few weeks. It stood taller than me at over 5 feet with the tall container. I eventually wanted to put it in a deeper container, but it would be too tall to fit in the winter greenhouse. I still wanted to think about transplanting it. These 2 will be 2 years old by the end of the month. The other cherimoyas were looking great in their air-pruning basket and on the table. I noticed many light green and soft leaves growing from the tops of the younger plants. The ones in the air-pruning basket were growing slowly, but they were safe from the extreme heat. Today marked 2 days after my cherimoya seedlings turned 2 years old. I decided what I wanted to do with the tallest and strongest cherimoya number 1. Because it was growing taller each week, I was afraid that it would get too tall for the winter greenhouse, which I planned to set up in about 2 months. I also had new plans to transplant it that would affect the height. I decided to top the tree, cutting off the tip of the new growth. I did this so the tree would stop growing vertically and would grow horizontally and add new side branches. It was hard to trim away part of the tree, but I wanted to keep it short and encourage new branches. The weather was hotter than July by the end of August. Due to another recent tropical storm, it stopped a 20 consecutive 100-degree days record in Austin. I checked the pruned cherimoya tree. I wanted to make sure that the top healed from last week. I noticed new growth on the smaller lower branch. I hoped that the topping would promote new growth on the trunk and encourage side branches to form. The other cherimoyas have been in the air-prune container for over 2.5 months. They were finally standing up on their own. The trees looked great for finally being 2 years old. I recently discovered about self-watering and self-wicking buckets. I recently converted one of my tree's pots into a self-wicking container. You'll use items such as plastic bottles, jugs, cans, or anything that can store water and line the bottom of the container to create a reservoir. You'll water the plant via a pipe that feeds and stores the water in the reservoir. Water will wick up the bucket through the soil and will evaporate through the top. There is a single drainage hole that is 1 inch below the water reservoir and will prevent the plant from drowning. The drainage hole also air prunes the plant's roots. I converted the largest Cherimoyas tree's pot into a self-wicking container using aluminum cans, a potting soil bag as a liner, and a PVC pipe. The other seedlings were doing better now that the weather cooled and even rained. On this windy day, I looked at all my plants after noticing new growth on many of my seedlings and small trees. I had recently set up the winter greenhouse due to a few cold nights for my cold-sensitive plants. It was completely vented and had fans for warm days. I also had a new temperature-controlled thermostat to which I could control the fans and heat lamps based on the temperature. It had been a warm and dry October so far, so it may be a few more weeks until we get cold weather. I checked the largest cherimoya, noticing new growth on the small branch. It still maintained itself, and I hadn't noticed any branch buds or changes on the plant's upper half. I still looked out for any changes. The smaller and younger cherimoyas were still growing taller in their shared containers. They've been in the same spot all summer. Some of them burned a little from the harsh sun, but they were looking good for the fall. I plan to hopefully transplant them in a larger container and thin them out. Since the Cherimoyas last year loved the greenhouse, I expected the younger plants to do the same when I put them in. The 2-year-old Cherimoyas in the air-prune basket have been in the basket since June. I was thinking about putting them back in their pots again, but it would depend on how much room I had in the greenhouse. They were looking great at this point, and they were still supporting themselves in the basket. Today was a big day because I planned to put all of my plants in the greenhouses. We were expecting a cold front to come in tomorrow, and it would knock the temperatures into the 40s. It's naturally colder where we are, so it might drop to the mid-30s. It was time to protect all of my plants. Cherimoya number 4 had grown a lot over the past months. It's the only tree with 3 impressive main branches, and it loved the full sun. The younger cherimoyas looked healthy with their light green leaves. The air-prune cherimoyas continued to grow taller and add branches. I made sure to keep them watered through the cool fall, and I couldn't wait to see how they would grow in the greenhouse. By the end of the day, I crammed my hundreds of fruit trees and seedlings in the 6x6 greenhouse. I also put some plants in the second greenhouse since my parents had a small number of plants inside it. Some of the smaller cherimoyas were on the metal shelves. Cherimoya number 1 was in the back, and the air-prune cherimoyas were in the middle. But don't worry, the plants won't be crammed for long. After putting the plants in the greenhouse, I made plans to get another greenhouse to prevent some of my plants from getting damaged and bent and to accommodate for more growth through the winter. The cherimoyas loved the Texas spring, summer, and fall. They transformed from large seedlings to healthy and thick-rooted small trees by the end of fall. I slowly found out that cherimoyas can be grown in Texas as long as the trees are in containers in full sun and are protected in winter during cold weather. I also plan to grow other annona fruit trees such as sugar apples in central Texas. I plan to make another update video of the cherimoyas while they are in the winter greenhouse, while they experience an unprecedented winter weather event, and when they go back into the Texas sun in spring 2021. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to learn how to grow cherimoyas from seeds, check out my Growing Cherimoyas playlist. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel and ring the notification bell, and follow my Instagram and Facebook pages for more videos about exotic fruit, growing exotic fruits, gardening, outdoor crafts, and more. Thank you.